I didn't plan on ever taking a job like that. I'd been an elevator mechanic for most of my adult life, the kind of work that makes you comfortable in narrow shafts and concrete basements and machine rooms where the air tastes like old dust and hot oil. You learn to trust what you can put your hands on. A cable is either frayed or it isn't. A relay either clicks or it doesn't. There's no room for imagination when you're leaning over a governor with your weight on a beam and your flashlight wedged under your chin. Then the contracts dried up in a way that seemed temporary until it wasn't. A company merger, a new vendor, a friend who stopped returning calls. My savings went faster than I'd expected. I'd always been proud of never needing help from anyone. And then pride turned into something sour that sat in my throat every time I checked my balance. I found the posting on a job board late one night, the hour when you start making decisions you won't admit to making. Overnight attendant, small highway station, light maintenance preferred. It wasn't even branded the way most stations are. Just a family name on the sign and a faded logo that might have once been a pine tree. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady and it started immediately. The location sounded like a joke, off Route 117, 18 miles past the county line. But the number at the bottom was real, and someone answered when I called. The woman on the phone didn't ask me many questions. She didn't ask about my experience with cash registers or lottery tickets or coffee machines. She just asked if I could work nights and if I was the kind of person who could handle being alone. When I said yes, there was a pause, like she was weighing something. Then she said, "We'll have you shadow for one shift. After that, it's mostly just you." I drove out there the next evening with my toolbox in the trunk because the words, light maintenance, had snagged on my brain. You don't show up empty-handed to anything that might require a wrench. The highway thinned out the farther I went. Streetlights disappeared. Cell signal bars dropped, returned, dropped again. The trees pressed close to the shoulder, black and tall and crowded, like they'd decided the road was a mistake but were too polite to say so. After the last turn, the GPS gave up and froze. The map stayed on the screen like a held breath. I kept going anyway, following the signs that looked older than me. Every few miles there was a reflective marker nailed to a post, the kind you see in places where people get lost in winter. The station finally appeared around a bend, a smear of light in the dark, a wide lot with faded lines, and a couple of pumps under a canopy. Behind it, attached by a covered walkway, with a low building that might once have been a motel or a diner. It had that same cheap brick and long, narrow windows. Most of the windows were dark. One glowed faintly from inside, and when my headlight swept across it, I saw dust swirling in the beam. The main store was small. The bell above the door still worked, but it sounded tired, like it had been ringing for too many years. The air inside was warmer than outside, and smelled like old fryer grease that had soaked into walls and never left. There were shelves of chips and candy, a coffee station with 3 glass pots, 2 of them empty, and a refrigerated case humming a little louder than it should. Behind the counter, a man sat on a stool, leaning over a paperback. He looked up when I came in and blinked slowly, like I'd interrupted him in the middle of thinking about something else. He was younger than I expected, mid-20s maybe, but his face had that worn, flat look people get when they've been tired for too long. His hair was pulled back, and there was a small scar on his chin that caught the fluorescent light. "You're the new guy," he said, not asking. I told him my name. He said his was Eli. He didn't offer his hand. He gestured to the back with his book like it was an extra limb. "Manager's not here," he said. "She'll be in tomorrow. I'm supposed to show you what to do. Then, I'm done." And there was something careful about the way he phrased things, as if he didn't want the store itself to overhear. He showed me the basics: register, cigarettes, lottery, how to reset the coffee machine if it decided to stop brewing, how to check the pumps on the little screen by the counter, where the spare paper towels were kept, where the restroom keys hung on their hooks. He did it all like he'd done it too many times and his brain had stopped being interested. But every so often his eyes flicked to the windows, not like he'd seen something, more like he expected something to be there. After 20 minutes, he said, "Come here," and led me through a door behind the counter into a narrow hallway that smelled like damp cardboard. There were 2 doors along the hall. One was a storage room stacked with boxes and crates. The other was a metal door with a keypad. Above it, a sign in peeling letters read, "Employees only." Eli punched in the code. The door clicked open. The room beyond was not what I expected. I thought it would be a little office with a desk and a security monitor. Instead, it was a small lobby with old carpet and a set of double doors at the far end. The carpet had a pattern that might once have been red, now faded to something like dried blood. To the right was a wall-mounted television showing a grainy split screen of camera feeds. To the left, a dull brass elevator door, the kind you see in older buildings. Beside it was a panel with a single arrow button, up and down, and a keyhole. "What's this?" I asked. Eli looked at me like I'd asked why the sky was dark. "Building used to be a roadside motel," he said. "Or an office. Depends who you ask. Owner never tore it down. Mostly closed now. But there's stuff back there. Storage. Old equipment. Manager wants someone on nights who can fix things when they break. Elevator's been acting up. That's why they hired you, I think." He watched my face for a reaction. I probably looked a little relieved. This was familiar territory. Metal doors, old controls. Something that made sense. I stepped toward the elevator. The brass was dull and scratched. Above the door, a small indicator window was dark. I ran my fingers along the edge and felt the grime packed in the seams. "Have you been using it?" I asked. Eli shook his head quickly. "No." "Then how do you know it's acting up?" His mouth tightened. "Because it comes down by itself," he said. "And sometimes it stops where it's not supposed to." That got my attention. Old elevators can drift if the brake is worn, but it doesn't usually present as stopping where it's not supposed to, not unless the selector is misreading or someone has been messing with it. I leaned in to look at the panel. There were no floor buttons here, just the call arrow. That meant the car had internal controls upstairs, or it was keyed. I looked for a service latch. The keyhole near the panel looked like a fire service. "What floors does it go to?" I asked. Eli didn't answer right away. He turned his head slightly, as if listening. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the cooler in the store, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights, and beneath it all, something I almost missed, a low, rhythmic thump, like a heartbeat, heard through a wall. Eli said, "Basement and the upper hallway." "Just 2 stops." "2," he said, and then, as if correcting himself under his breath, "Not counting." He stopped. He looked at me again, and something in his expression shifted from tired to intent. "Look," he said. "Before you start, I need to tell you some things. You're going to think I'm messing with you. That's fine. Think whatever you want. But if you want to get through a night here without..." He swallowed. "Without getting in trouble, you listen." Okay. The way he said "getting in trouble" sounded like the wrong phrase. Like he was trying to fit something enormous into something small enough to say. I nodded, half amused, half wary. He gestured back toward the store. "We'll talk in the office." Not out here. He closed the metal door behind us and punched the code again, like he didn't want it to stay unlocked longer than necessary. The office was what I'd expected to find earlier, a narrow room with a desk, a cracked swivel chair, a small safe, and a landline phone that looked like it had been there since the 90s, a corkboard with old schedules and faded memos, a small fan on the desk that was unplugged. Eli sat on the edge of the desk instead of the chair, like he didn't want his back to the door. He took a breath and rubbed his palms against his jeans. "I'm leaving in 10 minutes, he said. "So I'm going to make this quick. There are things that happen here at night that aren't on the training checklist. Management won't talk about them. They'll act like you're crazy if you bring it up. But the people who work here, the ones who last, we do a few things different." He looked at me as if waiting for me to laugh. I didn't. I'd worked in enough empty buildings at odd hours to know that sometimes places have their own mood. And the drive out here, the way the trees pressed in, the weak signal, the emptiness, it all felt like the world had thinned. Eli continued, his voice quiet. "If someone knocks on the front door after 2 in the morning, don't look outside. Don't go to the glass. Don't answer. Just pretend you didn't hear it." I opened my mouth to say something, and he cut me off. "I know how that sounds, but do it." He leaned forward. "If the lights flicker twice, not once, not a surge, not a single buzz. If they flicker twice, like someone switched them off and on, leave the main room, go to the storage room, and shut the door. Stay there until you hear the cooler hum steady again. Don't watch the cameras while you wait." "Why?" I asked, before I could stop myself. Eli's eyes moved to the corner of the office where the wall met the ceiling. There was a small dark stain there, like water damage. "Because if you stay out there, it notices you noticing," he said. "And you don't want that." The hair on my arms prickled in spite of me. I told myself it was the tone, the way he said it so plainly. He nodded toward the security monitor visible through the office doorway. "Cameras show things sometimes. People in the lot. Moving between the pumps, standing near the tree line. If you see someone on the camera, but you can't see them through the window, you don't react. You don't go looking. You don't lean to get a better angle. You just keep doing what you're doing, like you didn't see it." "Is this a prank?" I asked. It came out less confident than I meant. Eli's face didn't change. "No," he said. "I wish it was." He took another breath, and his hands tightened on the edge of the desk. "And if someone comes in," he said, "and they don't blink, just serve them. Don't make conversation. Don't ask questions. Don't say, 'Have a good night.' Just ring them up and let them leave." I stared at him. "They don't blink," I repeated, because my brain wanted to make it absurd enough to dismiss. Eli nodded. "You'll know." There was a silence after that. The store was quiet beyond the office door, the kind of quiet where you can hear the building settling. Somewhere in the back, a pipe pinged. I let out a small laugh that sounded wrong in the room. "Okay," I said. "So what? This is like hazing. You guys tell the new guy ghost stories. See if he panics?" Eli's gaze went flat. "If you panic, you're dead." He said it the way someone might say if you touch that wire, you'll get shocked. No drama. Just a fact. My stomach tightened. I didn't like the word dead in his mouth. He slid off the desk and stood. I need to go, he said. Before I do, there's one more thing. He hesitated, as if he didn't want to say it. That elevator, he said, and jerked his chin toward the hallway. If you're working on it, if you're riding it, never let it stop on one. I frowned. You said it only goes to 2 places. It's not supposed to stop on one, he said. But it can. How can it stop on one if there isn't? It can, he repeated, sharper now. His eyes were wide, and for the first time the tiredness cracked, and I saw something else underneath it. Fear, but controlled, like he'd held it in so long it had become part of his posture. If you're in it, and it slows down between floors, he said, if you feel it settle like it's going to stop where it's not supposed to, you do whatever you have to do to keep it moving. You hit the alarm, you hit the door close, you jump, you pray. I don't care. Just don't let it stop on one. Because if it opens there, you don't get to decide what comes in. The office felt colder. I realized I'd stopped breathing for a second. I forced myself to nod, as if agreeing would make it all harmless. Eli looked relieved, or at least less tense. Good, he said. And if you hear something calling your name from the back hallway, don't answer. Don't even think about answering. Just go to the front and turn the radio up. There was a small radio behind the counter, old and dusty. I'd seen it when I came in, turned low on some talk station that faded in and out with static. Okay, I said. Sure. Eli walked me back out to the main store. He showed me where the keys were hung, how to lock the register drawer if I needed to step away, and where the mop bucket was. Then he took his jacket from a hook and paused by the door. The night outside the glass looked thick, like the darkness had weight. I'm not kidding, he said one last time. If you feel like something is off, trust that. Don't be brave. Brave gets you hurt. He left. The bell above the door rang, and then the sound was swallowed by the empty lot. I watched his taillights fade down the highway, red, slipping between the trees, and then there was only the steady fluorescent buzz and the hum of the cooler and my own breathing. For the first hour, nothing happened. I stocked shelves. I wiped down the coffee counter. I read through the binder of procedures that management had left behind, full of laminated pages about tobacco sales and pump resets, and how to handle a fuel spill. There was nothing in it about not looking out the window after 2. The boredom made Eli's warning feel like a weird joke again. The more normal things stayed, the more my mind tried to reframe his seriousness into something else. Maybe he was messing with me because he was angry I was replacing him. Maybe it was a way to feel like he had some secret knowledge. Around 10:30, a trucker came in. Big guy, beard, smelled like diesel. He grabbed a coffee, complained about the price, paid in cash, left. He blinked. He made eye contact. He said thanks. Normal. Around 11:15, a minivan pulled up. A woman with 2 kids used the restroom. The kids ran around the aisles until she snapped at them. Normal. After midnight, the highway grew quieter. It wasn't a sudden change, more like a gradual thinning. Fewer headlights passed, the distant hiss of tires on wet asphalt. There had been a little rain earlier. Faded until I realized I couldn't hear it anymore. The trees beyond the lot looked like a wall. I checked my phone. 1 bar, then none, then one again. I tried to load a web page and watched it spin. I set the phone on the counter and told myself I didn't care. I was here to work, not scroll. It was around 1 when the first thing happened that made me stop. I was in the middle of labeling a box of cigarette cartons when the soda machine near the back made a noise. A sharp clunk, like someone had hit it with a fist. I looked up, expecting to see it cycling. It was still. The lights inside were on. The glass front reflected the aisle behind me. I walked over and put my hand on the machine. It vibrated faintly, normal compressor hum. The clunk didn't repeat. A few minutes later, the microwave behind the coffee counter beeped once. A short, single beep like it had finished cooking something. The display lit up and showed 0 o'clock, then went dark again. I stared at it. No one had touched it. The cord was plugged in. Maybe a power blip. Maybe it always did that. I went back to work. At 1:30, the security monitor flickered. One of the outside camera feeds, angled toward the pumps, showed a blur moving across the frame. It was fast, like a person walking close to the lens, but when I looked up through the windows, the lot was empty. The pumps stood under the canopy like pale skeletons. No cars. No movement. I leaned forward instinctively, and Eli's voice floated up in my memory. If you see someone on camera, but you can't see them through the window, don't react. I forced myself to sit back. I picked up the carton labels again and pretended I hadn't noticed. Even though my skin had gone tight, the blur didn't return. The feed stabilized. The empty lot stayed empty. I told myself it was a moth, or a glitch, or my eyes. At 2 o'clock, the radio behind the counter crackled with static. The talk show host's voice dipped and rose, as if someone were turning a dial slowly back and forth. I reached to adjust it, but when my fingers touched the knob, it steadied on its own. The voice became clear again. I withdrew my hand. I didn't like the way that felt, like the station had corrected itself to keep me from touching it. At 2:15, the lights flickered. It wasn't a soft buzz the way fluorescents sometimes flutter. It was a clean on-off-on twice, with a brief moment of true darkness between. The store went black, and then bright again. Black, and then bright again. My heart kicked. I stood so fast the stool scraped. For a second I froze, because part of me still wanted to believe Eli was exaggerating. But my body moved before my mind could argue. I went around the counter, through the hallway door, and into the storage room. I pulled the door shut behind me and turned the lock. The storage room smelled like cardboard and cleaning solution. It was cramped, stacked with boxes, and the only light came from a single bulb overhead that seemed dimmer than it should. My breathing sounded loud. Eli had said to stay until the cooler hum steadied again. I listened. Through the door, I could still hear the cooler, but it wasn't steady now. It had a stutter, like it was struggling to maintain its rhythm. A hum, then a pause, then a hum. Again. I stood among the boxes, my hands flexing. I didn't look at the little window in the storage door. I didn't reach for my phone. Time dragged. 10 seconds felt like a minute. Then, faintly, I heard something else. Not a footstep. Not a voice. A soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across tile. It came from the main store near the counter. Slow. Deliberate. My throat went dry. The cooler hum stuttered again. The scraping stopped. There was a silence so complete I thought my ears had stopped working. In that silence, I realized I could hear the fluorescent lights in the storage room. A faint, electric whine. Then the cooler hum resumed, steady, the familiar constant vibration through the building. I waited longer than I needed to. I stood there until my legs ached and the box smell made my head swim. When I finally unlocked the door and eased it open, The main store looked exactly the same as I'd left it. Bright. Empty. Quiet. No sign of anything. I walked back behind the counter and stared at the windows. The lot was still empty. The trees stood black and unmoving. I felt stupid and relieved at the same time. And underneath both was a thin strand of anger at myself for being so easily rattled. I tried to go back to work. But the air felt different now. Not colder, not warmer. Just strained, like the way a room feels after an argument, even if no one is speaking. Around 2:45, there was a knock on the front door. It was gentle. 3 taps, spaced evenly. I froze with my hand on the register drawer. The door was locked at night, per policy. There was a small slide window for after-hours transactions, though no one had shown me how to use it. The station wasn't supposed to get much business after midnight anyway. The knock came again. 3 taps. My body leaned toward the glass before I caught myself. The instinct to look is so basic it's almost painful to resist, like resisting a flinch. I kept my eyes on the counter, on the scratch marks in the laminate, on the little display that showed pump numbers. Another 3 taps. I didn't move. The silence after the last knock stretched. I wondered if I'd imagined it. I wondered if someone needed help. If someone had broken down on the highway. The rational part of my mind tried to build scenarios where ignoring a knock was cruel. Then, very softly, I heard a sound like a fingernail on glass, a slow drag down the door window, almost tender. My stomach turned. I stared at the counter harder, as if intensity could make me blind. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The nail sound stopped. There was a pause. And then a voice, muffled by the door, said my name. Not loud. Not angry. Just my name, spoken in the tone someone uses when they want your attention without startling you. I hadn't told anyone here my name. Except Eli. Management hadn't been there. No one else had come in since Eli left. I hadn't worn a name tag. The voice said it again, a little closer to the glass. My skin went cold in a wave. I didn't answer. I didn't even swallow. The voice sighed, like disappointed patience. And then there was another dragging sound, slower this time, across the glass. I wanted to run to the storage room, but Eli's warning about knocks after 2 was in my head like a hand pressing down. Never look outside. Never go to the glass. Pretend you didn't hear it. So I stayed behind the counter, facing down, my hands gripping the edge. After what felt like 10 minutes but might have been 1, the dragging sound stopped. I heard a faint scuff, like footsteps on concrete moving away from the door. Then nothing. When I finally let myself breathe again, it came out shaky. I hated that. I hated being shaken by a sound. I stood there a long time, not moving, listening for anything else. When nothing came, I turned the radio up. The talk host's voice filled the air, too cheerful, too alive. At 3:30, headlights swept into the lot. A car pulled up to pump 3 and stopped. The engine cut. For a moment, the driver didn't get out. I watched through the windows, relief washing over me because a real car meant normal, a human problem I could solve, a transaction. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out, average height, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He moved with an unhurried calm, like he had all the time in the world. He didn't glance around the lot. He didn't look toward the store. He walked straight to the pump and stood there for a moment without touching anything. Then he turned his head slightly and looked toward the tree line. My throat tightened. I couldn't see what he was looking at. The trees were a black wall. He turned back to the pump and began fueling. Normal. Fine. When he finished, he walked to the store door and tried it. It didn't open. Of course. He leaned closer to the glass. I stepped back instinctively, remembering the knock. But this time, the man just raised a hand and tapped. Polite. I hesitated. The station policy was to keep the door locked and use the slide window. But I hadn't been trained on it. And this was a real person, clearly visible, with headlights still on behind him. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. "Sorry," I said. "Night policy. How can I help you?" The man smiled slightly. His teeth looked very white in the fluorescent light. "I just need to pay for pump 3, he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. There was nothing threatening about him. I opened the door wider and let him in. He walked in without looking around much. He didn't browse. He came straight to the counter. As he approached, I noticed something subtle that I couldn't name at first. Something about the way his gaze moved. It wasn't that he stared. It wasn't that his eyes were too wide. It was the rhythm of his face. The micro movements people make without thinking. He didn't blink. Not once. He stood at the counter, looking at me with steady, unbroken eyes. His smile stayed in place like it had been set there. Eli's words slid into my mind, and suddenly the air felt thin again. "Serve them quickly. Don't make conversation." "Pump 3, I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Yes," he agreed, still smiling. "How much?" He named an amount that made sense. I rang it up. My hands felt clumsy on the register keys. The receipt printer whirred, loud in the quiet. He paid in cash, crisp bills. His fingers were cool when they brushed mine, and I had the strange impression of dry skin, like paper. I handed him his change. He took it, without looking down. For a moment, he just stood there, smiling, unblinking, like he was waiting for something else, like the transaction wasn't the point. I kept my mouth shut. I didn't say thank you. I didn't say have a good night. I just looked at the counter and let the silence stretch. Finally, the man's smile widened slightly, not in a friendly way, in a way that showed he understood something. He turned and walked out. The bell rang. The door closed. Through the window, I watched him walk back to his car. He didn't hurry. He didn't look around. He got in, sat for a moment, and then drove away without turning on his interior light. When his taillights disappeared, I realized I was gripping the counter so hard my knuckles hurt. I told myself it was a medical thing, dry eyes. Some people don't blink much. Maybe he was on something. Maybe I was primed to notice oddness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his unblinking gaze had been a test, and that I'd passed by not giving him anything. After he left, the store felt emptier than before, as if the brief human presence had only made the isolation sharper. At 4:15, the elevator buzzer sounded from the back hallway. It was faint, like an old chime, not loud enough to be heard in a busy place, but in the night silence, it was clear. I hadn't touched the elevator. I hadn't even gone into the lobby again after Eli left. The buzzer sounded again. A little longer this time. I stared toward the hallway door behind the counter. The door was closed, but I felt as if something on the other side was waiting, patient. Light maintenance, I reminded myself. Elevator acting up. That's why they hired you. The rational part of me wanted to go back there, check the control panel, see if the call button was stuck, see if the car was drifting. That's what I did. I solved problems. I put my hands on machinery until it made sense, but Eli had said it came down by itself, and he'd said never let it stop on one. I tried to ignore the buzzer. I turned the radio up a little more. The host laughed at something, a bright sound that seemed wrong in the empty store. The buzzer sounded a third time, longer, like an insistence. And then the lights in the store dimmed slightly, not flicker, just a soft sag, as if the building took a breath. I made a decision I still regret and still understand. I grabbed my flashlight from my bag under the counter. I told myself I'd just look. I wouldn't ride it. I wouldn't do anything risky. I'd just assess, the way you do when you hear a strange noise in your house and you can't sleep until you know what it is. I went through the hallway door and walked down the narrow corridor, my footsteps muffled by the old linoleum. The storage room door loomed on my left, and I felt a pang of relief knowing it was there. At the end of the hall, the metal keypad door waited. The code was still fresh in my mind. I punched it in. The lock clicked. The carpeted lobby beyond seemed darker than before, as if the lights were weaker. The security monitor on the wall still showed the camera feeds, but one of the outside screens was black now, a dead eye. The elevator door stood closed, brass dull. The call panel beside it was lit faintly, the down arrow glowing. The buzzer sounded again, from behind the door this time, as if the elevator itself was making the noise. I stepped closer and listened. Beneath the buzzer, I heard the low, rhythmic thump again, that heartbeat sound through the wall. I didn't like it. Elevators have sounds, fans, motors, relays. They don't have heartbeats. I shone my flashlight at the seam of the door. The beam caught dust motes floating in the air. Without thinking too hard, I reached for the keyhole on the panel. My toolbox was in my trunk, but I had a basic service key on my ring from my old job, a universal that fit more than it should. I tried it. It slid in smoothly. The panel clicked. The down arrow went dark. The elevator door remained closed. I waited. Nothing happened. Then, very slowly, the indicator window above the door lit up. A faint amber glow. A number appeared. 1. I felt my stomach drop. A physical lurch like missing a step on stairs. The elevator was on 1. It wasn't supposed to be. Eli had said it only went to basement and upper hallway. 2 stops. No one had called it. No one was here to ride it. The number held steady. The heartbeat thump continued, a little louder now that I was close. My hand tightened on the flashlight. Then the elevator made a sound like a sigh, a release of pressure, and the doors began to part. Eli's voice in my head turned sharp. Never let it stop on 1. If it opens there, you don't get to decide what comes in. I didn't think. I just acted. I twisted the key back hard, yanking it as if force could change electronics. I slapped the panel. I grabbed the brass doors with both hands and shoved them together, feeling the cold metal bite into my palms. The doors resisted, as if something behind them was pushing outward. The gap widened another inch. A smell came through the opening, faint but unmistakable. Damp earth, and something sweet gone rotten, like fruit left too long in heat. In the sliver of darkness inside, I saw not a hallway, not the interior of an elevator car the way it should look. There should have been a light, a metal wall, a floor. What I saw was depth, a darkness that didn't reflect my flashlight beam properly, like the light was being swallowed. And in that darkness, A shape shifted, not moving forward, not stepping out, just shifting, like someone turning their head slowly in a dark room. I shoved harder, panic lending strength. The doors scraped. The gap narrowed. From inside the darkness, a voice whispered my name. It wasn't muffled like the voice at the front door had been. It was right there, close, as if someone was leaning toward the crack. My throat seized. I couldn't answer even if I'd wanted to. The shape inside shifted again, and I had the sudden, insane impression of an eye, too large, too reflective, pressing toward the opening. I forced the doors shut with a final shove. The brass met with a solid clank. For a second, everything went still. Then, from behind the closed doors, there was a soft knock. 3 taps. Polite. I stumbled back. My shoulder hit the wall. The flashlight beam jittered across the carpet. The indicator above the door still showed 1. Another 3 taps from inside the elevator. My hands were shaking so hard I could feel the tremor in my wrists. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the door. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body felt slow, like moving through thick water. I turned and hurried back toward the keypad door. My fingers fumbled the code. Twice I hit the wrong number. The lock refused to click. Behind me, the elevator tapped again. 3 polite knocks. I finally punched the code correctly. The door opened. I slipped through and slammed it behind me, as if a thin metal door could stop whatever was in that lobby. Back in the hallway, the fluorescent lights seemed too bright. The normal smell of cleaning solution and stale air hit me like a lifeline. I hurried into the storage room and locked the door. I stood there shaking among the boxes, my flashlight still on, beam aimed at nothing. My breath came in shallow pulls. I listened for the cooler hum to steady, but I realized I'd come here without the lights flickering. This wasn't the same refuge. This was just a closet with a lock. For a long time, I heard nothing outside the storage door. Then, faintly, I heard the elevator buzzer again. Once. Twice. Then silence. I stayed in the storage room until my legs went numb and my mouth tasted like metal. I didn't check the time. I didn't look at the cameras. I just stood there and tried not to think about the smell, the darkness, the way the light had failed to find a surface. Eventually, because the human body can't hold panic forever without turning it into exhaustion, the shaking eased. My breathing slowed. When I finally unlocked the storage room and stepped back into the hall, everything was quiet. The store beyond looked the same as always. Bright. Empty. I went behind the counter and sat on the stool, feeling as if I'd aged years in an hour. I kept the radio up. I kept my eyes away from the hallway door. The rest of the shift didn't give me relief so much as a slow, grinding endurance test. Around 5, the security monitor showed movement near the pumps again. A shape crossing the lot. When I glanced through the windows, the lot was empty. I looked away immediately and pretended to count scratch-off tickets. At 5:30, the coffee machine gurgled as if it was brewing, though no one had touched it. The smell of burnt coffee filled the air for a moment, and then vanished. At 6, the front door handle rattled softly from the outside, a cautious testing. No knock this time, just the rattle, and then nothing. Dawn should have come gradually, a lightening of the sky behind the trees. Out there, it stayed dark longer than it should have. The forest line remained a solid black silhouette. When the sky finally did change, it did so unevenly, a bruised gray that made everything look sick. A little after 6:30, another customer came in, a woman this time, wearing a thin coat, despite the cold. She walked in without ringing the bell, though I'm sure she should have. She picked up a bottle of water and set it on the counter. Her eyes were focused slightly past me, not on my face. When I asked if that was all, she nodded without looking. Her skin looked pale under the fluorescent light, almost translucent. As I rang her up, she lifted her gaze to the security monitor above my head. "You saw him," she said quietly. My fingers paused on the register keys. "What?" Her eyes flicked to the window, then back to the monitor. "You saw him outside," she said, and her voice held no question, only certainty. I forced myself to keep moving. "That'll be $2.18, I said. She slid money across the counter. Exact change. And then she did something that made my blood turn cold. She smiled slightly, and she didn't blink. Not once. I finished the transaction in silence. I didn't say a word more than necessary. I handed her the receipt. Our fingers didn't touch. She picked up her water and turned to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at me. Her eyes shifted toward the hallway behind the counter, toward the keypad door that led to the elevator lobby. "Don't fix it," she said softly, like advice. "Some things are broken on purpose." Then she left. The bell didn't ring. I sat there after she was gone, staring at the counter, my mind trying to make sense of what she could possibly mean. And hating that part of me wanted to obey. When Eli's replacement came in at 7, an older man with a stained jacket and a thermos of coffee, he greeted me like everything was normal. He didn't ask how the night went. He didn't ask why my hands shook when I handed him the register report. I tried to tell him anyway. I tried to say something like, "The elevator stopped on one," to see if his face would change. He cut me off before I could finish. "You did good," he said, not looking at me. "You made it through." That was all. No explanation. No questions. Just that simple acknowledgement, like surviving the night was the job. I walked out into the morning air and felt as if the world outside the fluorescent lights was too wide, too exposed. The forest line still looked dark. The highway still looked empty. I got in my car, locked the doors, and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel until my breathing steadied. I didn't go back the next night. Or the next. I ignored the voicemail from the manager. I ignored the follow-up call. I told myself I was done. Pride be damned. I'd find another job. I'd sell tools if I had to. I'd do anything that didn't involve a brass door opening onto a darkness that had my name. For a while, that decision felt like it fixed something, like leaving the place behind meant leaving the fear there too. But fear doesn't work like that. It doesn't respect distance. It respects attention, and the harder you try not to give it, the more it presses against the edge of your thoughts. Weeks passed. I found day work doing basic maintenance at an apartment complex, fixing leaky faucets, replacing light fixtures. The kind of work that feels almost soothing after what I'd been through. I told myself the station was just a bad night in a lonely place. Stress, sleep deprivation, a coworker with a taste for messing with new hires, a string of coincidences I'd turned into something bigger, because I was primed to believe it. Then one evening, I stopped at a grocery store on my way home. It was ordinary. Bright aisles, families, carts, squeaking. I stood in line with a basket of food and tried to think about what to cook. When I reached the cashier, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the sensation of being watched. I looked up. In the aisle beyond the registers, near the exit, a woman stood holding a bottle of water. Thin coat, pale skin. Eyes focused slightly past the people around her, as if the crowd wasn't real. She was watching me. I couldn't move. My hands froze on the handle of my basket. The cashier asked if I had a rewards number. Her voice came through muffled, like I was underwater. The woman by the exit smiled slightly. She didn't blink. My vision tunneled. I felt the grocery store tilt. The fluorescent lights, suddenly too similar to the gas stations. The hum of refrigeration units, suddenly too loud. I forced myself to look down, to focus on the conveyor belt, on the groceries, on anything that wasn't her face. I made my hands move. I paid. I took my bag. I didn't look up again until I was outside, breath ragged in the cool air. The parking lot was full of cars. People walked past. Normal. The woman was nowhere near the exit. I told myself I'd imagined her, that my brain had pulled a familiar shape from memory and projected it onto a stranger. Then, as I loaded groceries into my trunk, I noticed a small square of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. At first, I thought it was a flyer, a coupon, something someone had slipped there in the lot. I pulled it free and unfolded it. It was a receipt. Thin gas station receipt paper, the kind that fades if you leave it too long. On the top, in faint print, was the name of the highway station off Route 117. Below it, the date. It was the date of my third night, and underneath, in the blank space where no item names should have been, someone had written my name in careful, neat letters, as if they'd taken their time. I stood there, with the paper trembling in my fingers, the grocery store noise around me suddenly distant. I looked up, scanning the rows of cars, the people, the moving shapes. For a moment, near the far edge of the lot where the light poles didn't reach as well, I thought I saw someone standing still, watching. But when I blinked, when my eyes did what hers never seemed to do, the shape was gone. I drove home with my mirrors adjusted too wide, checking them every few seconds. I locked my doors as soon as I got inside. I left all the lights on. I sat at my kitchen table with the receipt in front of me until the sky outside the windows turned fully dark. That was the night I understood something I hadn't wanted to accept at the station, something Eli had tried to tell me in his careful, exhausted way. Those rules weren't about the building. They were about what had learned the building was a good place to practice. And now, somehow, it had learned where I lived.